What's the best way to meditate around the concept of space? I find it helpful. So if you have your eyes closed, I have my eyes closed, then space and sound, or space and silence, are very similar. It's the absence, which in very real ways is the key to the entire Buddhist practice, is to appreciate the absence of things, or the cessation of something. So for sound, for example, you can see how our attention is drawn to notice sound of the voice or the wind or any other sound, but then particularly paying attention to the absence of sound, or noticing the near absence of sound. Or notice when there's a sound and then it ends, and noticing that process of cessation, how something ends. So like similarly, if you have a thought in your mind, our attention tends to be drawn towards a thought, a memory, something that's more exciting, so stimulating in some way. But what happens when that thought ceases? There's a little gap between the next thought, before the next thought comes. Even if it feels like it's continuous thinking, there's still a gap between the thoughts. So notice, when one thought ends, a little bit of silence in the mind. And as we start to pay attention to that silence, that absence, the absence of anything that is dramatically stimulating, and we notice, okay, well then we start to notice it more. It's there all the time, but we start to notice it more because what we pay attention to creates our reality, right? If we only pay attention to thinking and worrying and fear and insecurity, that's our reality. But if we pay attention to the cessation of thoughts and the quiet and the space between thoughts, then that gradually grows. Right? We gradually notice that, it's intrinsically peaceful. And so then once we begin to pay attention to it more, it's like our mind will incline to go there more and more easily, more and more often. And then it starts to grow. And then we notice, it's not just like mental space between thoughts, it's actually all around our thoughts. And as our mindfulness gets stronger, as our awareness gets stronger, it's like it expands a bit, and then it's like you're surrounded by a sphere of awareness, and then there's just a thought that pops up in the middle of that. And if it's important, we can pay attention to it. If it's not that important, then we recognize it, thought, and then it evaporates, and then we're just left with all the space. But even when the thought is there, it's like one small thing floating in all of the space of awareness. And the recognition of all that space, appreciation of all that space, then makes our mind feel much more spacious. It's like, it doesn't feel so cramped, like my head's just full of thoughts. It feels like, there's actually a lot of space. So even when there is thinking, it's like, but it's surrounded by or balanced by all of this space of awareness. So it's mostly mental space. When I talk about the reflection on space or contemplation of space, is more like the perception of space within our own mind or within our own citta. Now you can sometimes practice that with your eyes open as well. It's like if you look around the meditation hall, even when it's full of people, still mostly it's space. Right? Most of what's in between the floor and the ceiling, and mostly it's space. And just recognize, oh, there's empty space up there. So it's just recognizing, oh, actually a lot of our daily experience is simply space. And it doesn't stimulate us. It doesn't kind of jump out and grab our attention. But when you recognize the natural peacefulness of space, similarly as we would recognize the natural peacefulness of quiet, then our minds will tend to flow in that direction. That's why mindfulness is so important. Because if we don't recognize that there's any space, if we just don't pay attention to it, then the only information our mind gets is what we pay attention to, and that's thinking and planning and worrying and analyzing, and right? And if that's all we have to go by, then that becomes our reality. So simply paying attention, noticing what's already there. And then noticing when a thought ceases. It's like before you look for the next mental object, just notice the lack of object. Oh, there's cessation. There's something arises. Naturally, we are kind of drawn to the arising. A new thought, a new sound, a new smell, another thought. But just notice how things cease. There's a thought and then it ends. And then when it ends, what happens? There's a sound, but then the sound ends. What happens when the sound ends? And so then we start to pay attention to things ceasing and falling away. Notice every moment. It's like the past is ceasing, it's ending, it's ending, it's ending, it's ending. And so that's this process of cessation. You start to notice cessation. And when it ceases into quietude and spaciousness, then you start to get a taste of what's to come. That's how I do it. In the suttas, you find the Buddha gives specific meditations on the elements, space being one of them, with the encouragement to generally be like space. And he goes through the different elements like earth and water, etc. So now, if we're like air, if we're like space, then you can curse the space. Is the space bothered? No. You can try to write things with a spray can in space. Does it stick? No. He didn't actually use that metaphor. But no matter what we try to do with space, it doesn't stick. It's not bothered, right? You could spit on space, but it's not bothered. So if we meditate on these elements, say, oh, how can I be like space? Yeah, so no matter what happens to us, no matter what is said to us, just be like space. Criticism comes just like space. It's like wind blowing through, nothing to hit. But also when praise comes, then it's just like, okay, that's just like space as well. It doesn't stick. So that's how we can gradually be like space.